The Tennessee Titans have made a really big decision. They've hired a new head coach, that being Brian Callahan, formerly the offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. And, the reception to this hire hasn't really been great. A lot of people are like, who? You hired who? Is he better than Mike Vrabel? And this is what people got to understand about this hire. All right? This was one of those best bang for your buck hires. You ever go to Walmart and you go to the great value section and you have the great value Fruit Loops and they're only $1.50, and then you got the real Fruit Loops on the left side and they're like $4? You're going to go with the great value because maybe you don't got enough money to get the real thing of Fruit Loops. So it's the best bang for your buck. You see, Tennessee wasn't going to get any of the top head coaching candidates out there. Bill Belichick wasn't going to be interested in this job. Jim Harbaugh wasn't going to be interested in this job. Ben Johnson wasn't going to be interested in this job neither. So you were only going to be able to get one of the more mid candidates out there. And that was Brian Callahan. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's just he's not as big as the other top candidates out there. But it's not like this dude is some slouch. And he never called plays in Cincinnati. So the play calling that you saw this past season was from Zach Taylor. Brian Callahan has worked with Matthew Stafford, Peyton Manning, and Derek Carr. He's been on some pretty good offensive staffs. Zach Taylor's offense has been really good, and it was really good with Jake Browning. And even though he doesn't call the plays, there's been other head coaches that have never called plays in the past that's having success now, one of them being Mike McDaniel. And Brian Callahan's success is all going to hinge on what he can do with Will Levis. You see, this is why it made perfect sense. Tennessee moved on from Mike Vrabel. What was Mike Vrabel's biggest downfall? He was never able to get the offense right. Even despite the lack of talent that they had, the offense still wasn't really that good. So you move on from Mike Vrabel, and you got Will Levis, who he has signs to be a really good quarterback, but he also has signs that he could end up being not so great. And Will Levis' development should probably be the priority for Tennessee, because they aren't really in position to get any of the top quarterbacks in this year's draft. And Will Levis, he's the best quarterback play. Well, he gave them the best quarterback play that they've gotten in, 2 years? Ryan Tannehill has been washed up and injured. So you bring in a guy like Brian Callahan, Will Levis has all the tools to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You just need an offensive-minded coach who can unlock that. And if you weren't going to be able to get a guy like Ben Johnson, were you going to take a gamble on a guy like Bobby Slowick, who only has been the offensive coordinator for Houston for one season? Or are you going to get a guy like Brian Callahan, who already has been a finalist for several head coaching jobs in the past? Brian Callahan, his success in Tennessee is all going to stem on if he can turn Will Levis into a superstar. Look at the current state of the AFC South right now. You got the Houston Texans with C.J. Stroud, who has already proven himself to be a top 5 quarterback. You got the Indianapolis Colts, who almost made it to the playoffs with Gardner Minshew as their quarterback. Shane Steichen already has proven that whatever quarterback he gets, he puts them in the system to win. And I only can imagine how deadly Anthony Richardson is going to be in his offense in year 2, despite him coming off that injury. And then you got Jacksonville, if they end up figuring out next season between Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence really plays up to his potential of that generational label that they threw on him when he got drafted first overall years back, they're going to be scary too. So if you're Tennessee, you need good quarterback play. You can't afford to keep dabbling with different quarterbacks. Will Levis, his Thursday night game against Miami was really good, and his debut against the Atlanta Falcons was fantastic, but outside of those 2 games, he was a little bit over the place. So if you can get a guy like Brian Callahan who can reel in Will Levis and turn this dude into a superstar, you can be finding yourself in the playoffs. You see, the NFL now isn't like how it used to be when you can just win with anybody at QB. You see, the quarterbacks that are in the AFC Championship, in the NFC Championship, are all really good quarterbacks. You can't win with average QBs anymore. You see, now with a guy like Brian Callahan, you're going to be able to have a head coach who can fix what your biggest deficiency was under Mike Vrabel. And offensive-minded coaches are starting to take over the league now. He's been with a lot of successful offenses, really good quarterbacks in the past. This hire is getting way more hate than what it deserves because it really doesn't deserve any. They weren't going to be able to get a bigger name. For the people that are saying, oh, they could have got Jim Harbaugh, they could have got Belichick. Neither of those guys were going to want to take this job. This is still a rebuild. Brian Callahan is one of those coaches that he may need a little bit of time to continue to learn on the job. So a guy like Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh, who may just want to win now with the already established quarterback, they weren't being enticed for a job like this. And Tennessee is one of those squads that they're not really enticing to bigger name candidates out there. Brian Callahan, to me, was always the ideal fit. When I did my head coaching predictions, I had Brian Callahan predicted to get this job. Will Levis is a promising quarterback that you don't really know how good he is because you still don't have enough proven film. But you think about what he could be. And if you bring in a guy like Brian Callahan and he can get it right with Will Levis and they can worry about improving the offensive line, getting some better receivers, this could be a really good hire. But it's getting a little bit too much hate. They weren't going to be able to get any of the better head coaches out there. And that's not being disrespectful. That's just being real. Because this is a franchise that's in a rebuild right now. They just got rid of Mike Vrabel. But his biggest problem was that he missed on his offensive coordinator hires. After Arthur Smith, it was downhill from there. His offense was all about running that ball with Derrick Henry. You need more creativity. That's what Brian Callahan should do with you. Just because you don't call plays doesn't mean you're not going to be a good head coach. There's been plenty of head coaches that have had success that have never called plays in the past. He still has assisted with game planning, scouting, working with Joe Burrow. If he can make it work with Will Levis, this is going to be a successful hire.